Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we are going to learn how to build a basic model in openLCA, covering key topics such as database import, flows, processes, and product system creation, and finally we'll see how to run an impact assessment. Before jumping to the demonstration, a couple words about openLCA. It is an open source and free software developed since 2007 by Green Delta, and it is definitely one of the most used LCA softwares worldwide. Actually, the interest and use of this tool is rising because it is extremely powerful, flexible, and scalable, and it enables the best interoperability compared to other tools. It is part of an LCA tool ecosystem, which you can see here. So today, indeed, we are going to focus on openLCA itself, but just so that you know, there are other tools within the openLCA ecosystem, such as the LCA collaboration server and online LCA. So today we are going to get to this. We will obtain the whole life cycle of a photovoltaic system. And in this particular case, we are looking at the model graph that we are going to obtain. And of course, we will also obtain the results of the life cycle assessment. We are going to see the impacts of this photovoltaic system, namely on climate change, and we are going to see the different ways to visualize such results within openLCA. So let's get started. So the first step to start using openLCA is, of course, downloading the software itself. To do so, we can visit openlca.org and the download section. Here you will also find a form that you can decide to fill out in case you want to receive some info about our openLCA resources and support options, and you can also select your preferred language. And you can also tick here in case you want to receive our latest openLCA news. But let's go to the downloads page. As you can see, you will be able to download openLCA either for Windows, Mac, or Linux. And in this case, we take Windows into account. And we have two different ways, two different files. So there is the zip file and the executable file. It's up to you to decide which one to download depending on your preference. So with the executable file, you will have openLCA directly installed in your computer, while with the zip file, you will have to unzip the archive and start the executable file inside it. I decided to download the openLCA X file, and I can find it here. And I will find it here in my folder. At this point, I will just double click on it or anyway run the file to start the installation process, which will take just a few minutes. And this is openLCA once I open it for the first time. So I will have my welcome page here. Well, here on the left, I will have absolutely nothing. Usually, here is where you find the databases you are working with. But of course, since it's the first time you're using openLCA, it will be completely empty. At this point, we have different options because we can either create a database from scratch, import a database from a repository, for example, if you're working with the LCA collaboration server, which is not our case, or, which is what we are going to do, import a database from a file. And here is our database. So today we are going to work with EcoInvent 3.11, the cutoff version, and you can recognize the database because it has this Zolka format. Now, you may be wondering how to get this kind of databases, so let's see that together. So we're going to visit the openLCA Nexus, which is our marketplace for databases, and you will be able to find all of the available databases here. We have both free or for purchase databases. Today, like I said, we are going to work with EcoInvent. So you will find all the available licenses here. And the process to purchase a license and download the file is pretty straightforward. You just have to add the license in your cart, go to the cart, and then proceed to checkout. You will be asked to register or to log in case you are already registered, and then you will be able to proceed with the payment. After purchasing the license, you will be able to download the database, so we can now upload it within openLCA. And here it is. Now, in this case, we only have one database, but let's pretend you've been working with openLCA for quite some time and you have many databases here. Something useful to know is that you can also arrange the database within different folders. So we can right-click and set a folder. We can call it, for example, openLCA demo. And you will have the database within your folder. In case you also have other databases, you can also drag and drop them inside the selected folder. And now we have this database that, as you can see, it has this gray icon. This means the database is not active. To activate it, we just double click and the icon will turn yellow, meaning it is now an active database. And this is because it's not possible to work with more than one database at a time. It is actually possible to merge databases, but again, you can only work with one. Now let's take a look together at the structure of a database within openLCA. So we have some folders here, and you will find them within any database in the software. So the structure is absolutely the same for every database. Today, we are mainly working with the flows, processes, and product systems. So we are going to see how to create all of these elements. The flows are the inputs and the outputs of a process. So you can see them a little like the ingredients of a recipe, while the processes are the recipe itself. So where we have some flows, some inputs coming together to provide us with an output. And finally, product systems is where processes come together to provide the entire life cycle of a product. So where we can really see the whole life cycle, the whole supply chain of a product. Now, I assure you that once we see together how to create them, how the flow, the workflow is, you will understand it even better. Then we also have other folders. For example, the projects folder is where I can compare different product systems, so basically different products. For example, if I want to compare the impacts of oat milk against the impacts of cow milk, this is where I can do it. I will have two product systems, one representing oat milk and one representing cow milk. And this is where I can compare the impacts of these two products to see which one is more impactful indeed. Then, of course, we also have other folders. I won't go too much into detail about those, but just so that you know, here, for example, is where we have the impact assessment methods. For example, if we open it, we will have the EcoInvent 3.11 LCIA methods package because this is already included within the EcoInvent database. But let's pretend I want to actually use other methods as well. I can do it by importing them. I have them stored here, so I can just see that I have my openLCA LCA methods package, and I can recognize the methods, the impact assessment methods, because they have this zip folder, which I do not have to unzip. For example, if I wanted to import this, I would just open them, and within a few moments, within a few minutes, I would have them inside my database. But indeed, now we won't use them, so we can stick with the EcoInvent methods. Then we also have other folders in case, for example, you're working with global parameters or data quality systems, you can find them here. And then we also have some background data. But again, let's stick to our first folders. And let's see what's inside our flows folder. So of course, now we already have something inside because we are working with EcoInvent, so with a database that already contains some data. For example, if I open this folder and subfolders, I will get to this list of flows. And namely, as you can see, they have this little wheel here representing a product flow. So again, we have some data, some flows, but for example, let's pretend the flow I need is not present within the database. What I can do is to create a new flow. For example, for the case study that we are going to carry out, we are going to need this particular flow, so PV system components. I can add a description. For example, this flow represents PV system components. I have to choose the flow type. So it can either be an elementary flow, a product flow, or a waste flow. In this case, of course, the PV system components is a product flow. And then I have to select the reference flow property. In this case, we select number because it will be one item, one group of PV system components. Once I'm satisfied, I can just click on finish and I will have my flow created here. It automatically opens this new flow, so I have a general information tab with some info, like the name and the description we just added together. And if I go in the flow properties tab, I will find the flow property that I selected, so number. So we are referring to one item. Now, as you can see, I have created this flow here and previously other flows. In this case, these are all waste flows and another product flow. But it's not really nice to have these flows all here. So outside of folders, there's not really a clean view. So what we can do is to create a new folder. So for example, we can call it PV system case study. We can add it and we will have our new folder created here. What I can do is just select my flows and drag and drop them inside the folder. Okay, so they are now all here. I can, of course, also create subfolders if I want to with add new category. So everything is much more in order. So now we know how to create a new flow, but let's go to the processes folder. The same as before, here as well, we already have some folders, some data that comes from EcoInvent. So if I open folders and subfolders, I already have some processes. But like I mentioned before, today we are going to see a case study together. And namely, just to give you more info about this case study, the goal was to assess the environmental impacts of a photovoltaic system, which has been produced in China and then transported to Germany for the use and end-of-life phases. So if I now open my PV system case study folder that I previously created, I arranged three different folders, subfolders actually. So one representing the upstream phases, the second one representing the use phase, and the last one representing the end of life. If I further open them, I will go more into detail about the different steps of the life cycle. So we basically have the first step, so the photovoltaic system component sourcing happening in China. Then we'll have the transportation from China to Germany, and then the installation, the electricity production, and the end of life happening in Germany. As of now, everything has already been created, but of course, we want to learn how to create a process. To do so, we are going to eliminate this first step so we can create it together from scratch. Let's also close these tabs as we don't need them anymore, and let's create a new process. So, new process, we are going to name it exactly as it was before, so PV system components sourcing, and we have to set a quantitative reference. The quantitative reference is the main output of a process, and in this case, it is exactly the flow that we created before together, so the PV system components. Once I select it, I already created my process. So I will have my general information tab with the name and description if I want to add one and other info. But the main tab, the core, I would say, of a process is the inputs and outputs tab. So here, like we were saying before, is where my inputs that I still have to add come together to give me an output. And this output, of course, is the quantitative reference that we just selected, so the PV system components. Now, let's add the flows that we need. So in order to do it, we can either click here, we can double click, or we can right click and add. These are all different ways to have the same results, so adding new flows. Of course, I have the list of flows in front of me that I have to add, and these are the PV system components, so the inverter 2.5 kilowatt. Then we will have the mounting system. So at first sight, it looks like this is the only result I got, but this is not exactly the flow that I want, so don't forget to expand the selection to be sure that all the possibilities are available, are displayed, and indeed this is actually the flow that I need. Then we are going to add the panel, this one here, and last but not least, the module. Perfect. So now I already added the flows that I need. Of course, we have this first column that is just the name of the flow, basically. Then we have this other column representing the path that I have to follow to find this flow. What does it mean? It means that if I open the flows folder and I follow this path here, so manufacturing, 26, then 261, and I open it, I will get to the folder where this flow is kept. So indeed, I can see it here. They are in alphabetical order, so I can find it here. And actually, another way to add a flow is to drag and drop it here. Of course, now we don't need two single C wafers, so I can remove one. It was just to show you this is also another way to add a flow. Okay, let's close this folder here and these columns. Now, what we have to do is to adjust the amounts and the units, but actually the units are already connected, but just so that you know, you can also modify them. So there is a drop-down menu here, and you can select other units. Well, for the amounts, I also have them noted in front of me. So I have the inverter, which is 2.4. The photovoltaic panel is 0.71. The mounting system would be 21.42 and 9, and the module is already correct. Perfect. Now let's close these columns as we don't need them, and let's get to the provider. So the provider column is really important because the provider let us select the process from which the flow comes from. For example, now I know that the provider is this process here, and the way I have to read this is this flow is an output of this process here. To better understand this, let's open the process together so we can right-click and select Open Provider, or there is actually another way to do it, so I can also show you how to perform a research of a process inside openLCA. So we can also copy the name of this provider. I can paste it here, search for it in processes. We can open it and go in the input and outputs, and I will see indeed that the output of this process is my inverter. That's exactly what it means. It means this flow comes from here, from this process. So it's really important to select providers because this is how I build my supply chain. Because in this way, I will really consider the whole value chain of my PV system. I'm also considering not only the following steps that I created previously, but also the previous ones. So where these components come from. Perfect. Now let's save, first of all. We can close these tabs as we don't need them now. And we now understood how to create a process. So first of all, what I notice is that our process is here outside of every other folder. So what I will do is to drag and drop it inside the upstream folder. Much better now. The problem, let's say, is that now I have this process, but it is not connected to the following steps of my value chain. What I have to do then is to open the next step, so the transportation. Let's go in the inputs and outputs, As it is a transportation process, of course, I will have some transport flow, both by lorry and sea, because I'm going from China to Germany. And what I have to do is to add the flow PV system components and select the appropriate provider, which is the process that we just created together. So now I'm saying these PV system components coming from this other process, so the PV system component sourcing, are transported to get my PV system transported. So I will have my PV system transported from China to Germany. Let's save as well. And I can see this pattern all along the value chain. So if I open the next step, for example, the photovoltaic system installation, what I expect is to have this output as an input. Let's see it together. And indeed, I will have my PV system transported that has been installed. So using some electricity, it has been installed, and I will have my PV system installed. The same for the following step. So I will have my PV system installed that provides me with electricity, of course. This is the use of a PV system. And after I have used it, I will have my PV system used. So now I will have a waste flow as well. So you see, this is really how I connect all the different processes. So again, never forget to select providers. This is really important because if you don't, the software will select a random link. But it is, of course, much better to have control of your supply chain. At this point, we saw how to create a flow, how to create a process. The next step will be to see how to create a product system. To do so, we can also close these other tabs. We already saved everything. And what we are going to do is to stay inside this photovoltaic system electricity production process. We can go in the Journal Information tab and create a product system from here. In this case, we selected unit process because we want to see which processes are connected to our reference process. This way, we'll get our product system. Here, as usual, we have the General Information tab with the name, the description, and some info like the process the product system was created from, the flow property, the target amount, etc. But what we are really interested in right now is the model graph. Like we anticipated, the model graph is where I can also visually see the whole life cycle of my photovoltaic system. So here in pink, we have the process we created the product system from. So we have the electricity production. And then what I expect is that going back in the value chain, I will see these previous steps. So the installation, the transportation, and the sourcing. So here I already see that I have the installation process. Going back, I will have my transportation process. And again, back, I will have my PV system components sourcing. So the process that we created together, you recognize the flows that we added before and the providers that we selected. So also here, you remember we selected the provider of this PV system components as this process. And this arrow represents exactly this. Since it is also possible to modify the model graph, for example, I may delete these connections. So I could also do that. I would say keep so that the process anyway stays here. So as you can see now, it is telling me you have selected no provider. So what I can also do is to do it manually. So I can drag and drop the arrow to establish again that I have this provider here. Now, if we also go further down in the value chain, I will see my photovoltaic system, the installation, and further down, my different ways of treatment depending on the component that I am considering. In general, within openLCA, products flow downstream along the supply chain, while waste flows go upstream because waste treatment processes are modeled as suppliers. Okay, now you can also save all of this as an image. For example, if you're writing a report, this can also be really useful. But now that we have all of our life cycle of the PV system, what I want to do is to calculate the impacts. So we can go back to the General Information tab and hit on Calculate. Now, of course, it's telling me that I made changes because I deleted for a second the provider, but we can also say no to not take that into account. Now we have to select an impact assessment method from the drop-down menu. Let's say that the environmental footprint is the one we want. So I will just hit on finish and really quickly I will get my results. First of all, I would like to point out that it is possible to export the results to Excel or also to save the results within openLCA. So I can save them, for example, as results. So if you notice now, the results folder is empty. If I save it there, I will see something appears within the same folder. So I will see the results here. Okay, now let's close them. Perfect. Now, as you can see, we have different tabs. So they are all different ways to visualize the results without looking at every single one of them. Let's take, for example, the contribution tree. I think this is a really nice way to see the results. Now let's select the input category, for example, climate change. This basically tells me the contribution of each process to this input category. And of course, also gives me with a number, so the total kilograms of CO2 equivalents emitted from the process. And the nice thing is that if I go down in the value chain, I will find out which is the hotspot. So really where the most of this input comes from. So for example, if I stop here, I already see that the panel is basically the main contributor to climate change. And if I go further down, I will see that the silicon, the production of silicon, is the main contributor to climate change, enabling me to, like we said, identify the hotspot of the whole life cycle of the PV system. Now, another way to see this type of results is with the Sankey diagram. Let's say this is even more immediate because if we now select the same impact category, so we have the same results, of course. Basically here, I just have to follow the thickest line to understand again, which is the process contributing the most to a certain impact category, in this case, climate change. Of course, now the final results will be the same. So always the production of silicon. And here as well, the same as for model graph, I can also save these as an image. We got to the end of this video. I hope you found it useful and that it will be just the beginning of your openLCA journey. Thanks again for watching.